March 8, 2014. Exactly 40 minutes into what was supposed to be a completely routine red-eye flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, a massive wide-body airliner carrying 239 people crossed over into Vietnamese airspace. Everything was completely normal, and then it just slipped out of existence.
Right at that 40-minute mark, the cockpit casually radioed Vietnamese air traffic control. They said, "Goodnight, Malaysian 370. It's such a mundane, everyday sign-off. But the absolute second those words were spoken, the aircraft's transponder went dead. It completely stopped transmitting its position. The secondary radio communication systems, unresponsive. The plane went totally dark.
We really need to pause and think about the sheer, staggering scale of what we're talking about here. We're looking at 243 tons. That is the mass of the metal, the miles of wiring, the fuel, and the human lives strapped into this Boeing 777. It should be fundamentally impossible for an object of that immense magnitude to just vanish from every modern tracking system we have.
But it didn't just vanish in place, it actively diverted. Right after that sudden silence, primary military radar actually picked up an unidentified blip. The aircraft had turned completely around, flying right back across the Malay Peninsula. And what's wild is how precisely it moved, literally threading the needle right between two different flight information regions. It was weaving through the blind spots until it finally dropped off primary radar past the northern tip of Sumatra, 2 full hours into the flight. But here's the crazy part. For days, the entire world was staring intently at the completely wrong ocean. Because the flight was scheduled for Beijing, all those early, desperate search efforts saturated the South China Sea. Fleets of ships and helicopters scoured the water, turning up absolutely nothing but random ocean trash and unrelated oil slicks. We were throwing massive resources right at the exact spot where the plane wasn't. So how did the search suddenly pivot to the other side of the world? It comes down to one tiny piece of equipment that was still secretly talking to the outside world, an automated handshake. The plane's satellite data unit was silently pinging an Inmarsat satellite hovering over the Indian Ocean about once an hour. It's exactly like when your cell phone is sitting in your pocket with the screen off, but it's still quietly checking in with a local cell tower. Now, these background pings contained absolutely zero GPS data, no coordinates at all, just a silent electronic pulse in the dark.
And this leads to one of the most incredible MacGyver moments in modern history. Investigators realized they could track the plane by analyzing the Doppler shift of those silent background pings. You know how an ambulance siren sounds higher pitched as it speeds toward you and lower as it drives away? That's the Doppler effect. By measuring the incredibly minute frequency changes in the radio signal hitting the satellite, engineers actually mathematically modeled the plane's movement. They literally used the physics of sound waves to track a ghost. Nobody had ever even thought to do this in aviation history.
That crazy math generated two massive, sweeping possible flight paths. One was a northern arc stretching way up deep into Central Asia, and the other was a southern arc plunging straight down toward Antarctica. But military radar quickly ruled out the north. A massive Boeing 777 is not sneaking through heavily militarized Asian airspace without setting off every alarm imaginable. That left the southern arc, a brutally remote, aggressively empty expanse of the southern Indian Ocean. That realization triggered one of the most grueling deep-sea sonar searches ever attempted, following what became known as the seventh arc. The scale of this is just mind-numbing. We're talking about meticulously sweeping 120,000 square kilometers of pitch-black ocean floor. And these aren't shallow waters. The depths out there routinely drop past 5 kilometers straight down. And here is a twist literally no one saw coming. That incredibly expensive, multi-year, cutting-edge sonar search, it completely failed to find the aircraft. But, totally by accident, dragging those sonar arrays around created the most detailed maps humanity has ever made of that part of the ocean floor. We suddenly discovered massive underwater trenches, unknown seamounts, and giant volcanic features we had absolutely no idea existed. We accidentally mapped an alien world on our own planet, but we still couldn't find a 243-ton airplane.
So how did we finally get physical proof? It wasn't the high-tech sonar, it was a random beachcomber. In July 2015, on the tiny French island of Réunion, a guy found a weird piece of metal tangled up in seaweed on the beach. It turned out to be a flat-track fairing from a Boeing 777, and it was traced definitively to our missing plane. Over the next few years, more than 30 pieces washed up thousands of kilometers away on African coastlines. Oceanographers modeled the drift currents, and guess what? They perfectly matched those satellite arcs. The incredible math was undeniably right. but finding a few scraps of metal on a beach is a long way from pinpointing a fuselage in the deep ocean.
Without the main wreckage, two totally different theories are still endlessly debated. On one side, you have the deliberate action theory. This points to the fact that the transponder was intentionally turned off, the incredibly specific flight path, dodging radar, and a really similar route found on the captain's home flight simulator. It suggests a pilot intentionally flew the plane to a remote zone. On the other hand, you have the ghost flight theory. This idea suggests a sudden catastrophic depressurization or a massive electrical fire knocked out the crew, leaving the autopilot to just blindly fly on its programmed heading until the engines finally suck the tanks dry. Without the black boxes, neither one can actually be proven definitively.
In 2018, the Malaysian government finally released its official report. Their conclusion? The aircraft was deliberately diverted, but they completely stopped short of assigning blame to anyone because they just didn't have the definitive evidence. And that right there leaves the families of those 239 passengers trapped in this agonizing 11-year limbo. It's a never-ending state of grief without any real proof, forcing them to live with the reality that their loved ones might never have a known resting place.
The sheer shock of this mystery did force massive global tracking reforms almost immediately. International authorities mandated that commercial aircraft absolutely must broadcast their position automatically every 15 minutes, and every single minute if there's an emergency. They even upgraded the underwater locator beacons on flight recorders from 30-day batteries to 90-day batteries. The entire goal was to guarantee a commercial flight can never just turn off its transponder and vanish from human oversight ever again.
Yet despite all the reforms, and even a new search initiated in 2026, the answers are still out of reach. We live in an age of total surveillance, where everything is tracked, logged, and monitored. But it turns out, all of that can still be defeated by a combination of intent, geography, and very, very deep water, leaving us with the chilling reality that there are still places on this earth where 243 tons of metal can fall from the sky and simply never be seen by anyone ever again.